About right, doesn't it? In the toward the end of the '60s, is that when the rumors about you being dead surfaced? Do you remember that? Do you remember how that started? What were your feelings about that?
What happened? Yeah, my feeling. What happened was we did a cover for a record called Abbey Road, and we. See, even the cover gets applause. And the idea was to walk across the crossing, and I showed up that day with sandals, flip-flops, and so it was so hot that I kicked them off and walked across barefooted. So this started some rumor that because he was barefooted, he's dead. I couldn't see the connection myself.
No, I don't. It seems like a long, slow, difficult death. Being barefooted will kill you.
Scorched feet.
And how do you manage something like that? Because it was a global rumor.
Yeah. I mean, I just laughed at it and knew it was just because of the fame and the craziness. It was an American DJ, so you guys are to blame.
Yeah.
Not you personally, but... No, the thing is, I just laughed it off, but it was a little bit strange because people did start looking at me like...
Right.
Is it him? Yeah. Or a very good double?
Well, that was the idea. That was the other part of it, that there was a guy who looked like you taking your place.
No, well, this is him.
Yeah. Or is it?
Welcome everyone to another episode of Adventures into Reality. Here we are at the Galactic Historian Studio Extreme. I am joined by Natalie. Natalie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Andrew. And boy, do we have an awesome show packed for you guys today. I think the question on everybody's lips right now, Andrew, is what's the deal with Paul McCartney?
What's the deal with Paul McCartney? The Sir John McCartney that we all know and come to have loved today is said to have died in 1966 in an accident, and all the Beatles members have been keeping it a secret since then. Now, this is one of those conspiracy theories that has jumped generations, and we've heard of numerous composers, musicians, thinkers, and philosophers who have survived a supposed death to go on and do something else in obscurity. But in this one, he didn't go on into obscurity. He went out into international fame, became knighted by the Queen herself. That's how far that went. Mm-hmm. So Natalie, what were your views of the Beatles growing up? I mean, how much did they affect you?
Oh, well, growing up in the countries I grew up in, I mean, we knew about the Beatles, but it wasn't as, crazy as out here. I love their music. I really did. And but I love their music amongst a whole bunch of other groups as well. But there were certain songs that really affected me, triggered something, stirred something up in my soul. And I think that's what made them so famous. They had some kind of an equation that really affected humanity in a really, really big way.
So for those of you out there that are new and maybe don't know much about the Beatles, if you go into any search engine and you type in F-A-U-L McCartney, and that is the faux Paul McCartney, that is the person that replaced him. And this person was supposedly a body double that had won a contest, and then after his death, they learned he was an okay guitarman, and they put a big-ass beard on him, and they went on world tour. And each of the individuals had denied it over many years, and then when Ringo Starr on his deathbed began to say that he really died, and many of them couldn't take it, and even John Lennon and Yoko Ono, they all knew. Everyone inside the band knew. Mm-hmm. And then you had the higher-up corporate execs who knew they were making billions upon billions. They were also imprinting a reality with a whole new brand of advertising.
So how many people do you think actually knew? I mean, first of all, is this true? I mean, give us your take on it first of all. I mean, we're kind of looking at what people are saying, but what's your take? Did this really happen?
Oh yeah, it really
Oh,
happened.
okay. And how many people knew in the beginning?
Hundreds.
Wow. It was
Every major investigative agency knew and was paid off. Like the CIA, the NSA, the Russians, all of the major agencies knew.
So they duplicated his fingerprints. I mean, how did they all do that from the medical perspective, from the DNA perspective? I mean, how
Well,
was
it
that
wasn't DNA.
orchestrated?
He was a body double, and at that point in history, it was easy to change out records. There was no digital
So
data.
they just changed out the records.
Just change out the records. That's the way it was done then. The world was a very different level of corruption that we have today. It was non-digital, off-books corruption. So a very different style. And as the story grew and grew, and their popularity grew and grew, the amount of bribes grew and grew and grew. And so finally, a bunch of people had to be killed off so they wouldn't sell their story in the early 80s or the early 90s.
But how could the Queen, for example, not know? Or did she know and she was just playing along? I mean, at the pinnacle of what she is and who she is, I mean, surely when it's a person, a being that affects millions across the world.
Why wouldn't you knight a being that's affected millions of people? You're projecting power, aren't you? That is the Queen's duty. Do you think she's the only queen that's ever projected false power out of a person they promoted? Every queen in history has done it.
Like you always say, there's a bear shit in the woods.
It doesn't bear exactly. If it doesn't hear it, anyone's there to hear it. You know. So going further and further into this conspiracy of Paul McCartney, it came to a point where, as I said, Ringo Starr was on his deathbed, and he's beginning to reveal all the truths. What hasn't he told us about John Lennon and his death, or what has Yoko Ono known? It was a great time of change. The world was within a hair's breadth of unity consciousness. The people were out in the streets. They were making change. There was separation of densities clearly at that time. You had the change in the rebalancing of the racial values. You had science that was meeting mysticism, that was confronting the church power and domination and control. For years in a row, they were out marching in the streets with flower power. And when Paul McCartney, was replaced, it was an understanding that if they didn't keep up that charade, what might happen to that whole group of people that had sought that energy.
So do you think that this was all remote viewed, and this car accident that he supposedly, well, he did die in it, obviously. This car accident that he died in, was this an accident? Was this remote viewed? I mean, how was this all constructed, and how many years ago was this actually planned?
Well, thousands of years ago.
Yeah,
It is a timeline incursion. Whenever they or the system or an individual removes themselves from a reality through a death, and you are a gigantic personality such as that, you are making a statement, no matter what. You are a statement being from the moment you're a fetus. So his statement was overridden. Okay? Or was his statement that I will be replaced so that I would not kill the movement?
And also, as you can see now, when you said already at the beginning of this year and at the end of last year, you were saying that many things will be revealed. There'll be huge, people on their deathbeds admitting to things that most people would have never even considered, would never even come into their mindset. And we were talking about this earlier, calamity. The calamity now of all the people that had this belief in their system that this was one person, and now their world is just breaking apart. And this is actually on propaganda news as well. This isn't just on the internet.
The news agency, NBC and CBS News, have both got caught with their major news reporters. NBC and Fox, both with their major news reporters, actually reporting false stories. In one instance, Bill O'Reilly is making direct statements where he was in a country and making a report and not actually there. Now, that's common practice in our news industry. So what does that tell you about the overall power of the news industry to craft a reality that has no truth behind it?
Well, we can't even get the right color of dress these days, so I mean,
Exactly.
see if that's real what they're showing us in the news.
So the news of the 1960s was very different. They had war correspondents on the things showing blood and guts, not like they do today. And in America at that point wasn't doing the best in the war. They weren't the top dog in that area because it was an entrenched ancient warfare that was just bogging them down. You had Paul McCartney, you had the Beatles, you had all the other musicians of that time that were singing for freedom. And when freedom interacted with the revolution of drugs, sex, and rock and roll, is where the system of domination and control began to individually limit some of these very powerful personalities. And in Paul's situation, it was an actual attempt at timeline genocide to remove his true signature frequency from the Beatles. Important because there's millions upon millions of women and men who have had intense sexual fantasies from their heroes and musicians growing up, one of them being Paul McCartney.
Also absolutely accentuated with all the drugs and everything else that was going on in that time. Just, I mean, that must have been so intense.
Right, for every person that's ever said, oh, I met Paul McCartney or Ringo Starr, that story they've retold every time to their children or to their loved ones. And now that story has something removed from it.
And now, what does it look like to the children when they're like, well, you didn't even know that this guy wasn't even real? I mean, literally a thread is being pulled in the structure, and
right.
You're starting to see a slow collapse of what was to what should be, what is now.
In that construct of creating the fake Paul McCartney, think of a Jenga tower, and you pulled out one and you know it's over. There's no move to make without the tower to fall over. And that is where the Beatles are at right now.